Morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us. Our learning this morning is sponsored by Jacqueline Rabbi Chaim Arzuman, memory of Jacqueline's father, David Lazari, David ben Harap Moshe, Zichron Levracha, to commemorate his yortzeit on the 27th of Tammuz. It should be a schut for his neshama. Thank you very much, Mrs. Arzuman, for joining us, and it should be a schut for his neshama, as I'm sure everything you and your beautiful family do day in and day out. Okay. Chapter 31, verse 6. So Hashem instructed Moshe to mobilize the Jewish people in battle against Midian. We spoke a lot yesterday about the fact that this was Moshe's sort of essentially his last major task in this world. And now in verse 6 it says, Vayishlach osam Moshe elef lamatel latzava. Moshe sent them out 1,000 per tribe to battle. Osam, yes, Pinchas ben Elazar Kohen Latzava. Pinchas was sent to be the Kohen supervising them, as we discussed yesterday. And he sent him with holy items and the trumpets. Okay, so 1,000 per tribe. Is that many soldiers? Is that few soldiers? Why do we even need to know how many soldiers they sent? Ramban on Pasuk Vav, Vayishlach osam Moshe elef lamateh. Lo shalach sham kolam hatzava. Says the Ramban, he didn't send in the whole army. There were many more men of appropriate age that could have fought. V'afal pi shahayu hamidyanim am rav ve'arim b'tzuros gedalos. Look, the Midianite cities were fortified. They were a large nation. So why are you only sending in 12,000? We know the story already. This is the story from 2 parshas ago. There were many, many Jewish men who succumbed to the seduction of the daughters of Midian. And when the Jewish people go to battle, certainly in the Chumash, yes, they're going to fight, but the feeling is that they're going as God's army and they're meriting tremendous divine assistance for their efforts. But for people to merit divine assistance, they have to be up to snuff. So therefore, Moshe sent a very select group, specifically people who were known as being uniquely pious. Both in the sense that there wasn't concern that they would succumb to the same things that the Jewish men succumbed to with the daughters of other nations before, but also just in general that they should be people of unique piety who should merit divine assistance. V'nei Moshe lo tziva osam mayasu. Interestingly, says the Ramban, Moshe didn't tell them what to do. He didn't give them instructions per se. Rak tziva lohem lo seis tikmas Hashem b'Midyan. His instruction was to take vengeance for God against Midian. V'choshav shelo yashiru bohem sarid v'polit k'nikmas Amalek. O k'nikmas shiva amin. And Moshe's thought process was that there'd be no remnants, just like when the Jewish people battle Amalek or the 7 nations residing in the land of Israel. Uchshira she'ishiru hanashim b'taf abhema katzaf al hanashim hayodos mishkav zachar. So that's why we're not going to see it inside here, but in the following psukim, when they come back with all these spoils, including women taken from Midian, Moshe is very upset because Moshe says that all of the women who had been with men sexually should be killed. He says for 2 reasons. First of all, that's the Nikmas Hashem. That's the vengeance of God. The Midianites used their women as a way of pulling down the Jewish men. So if this is just national, trying to get land from each other, then the women have nothing to do with it. But this is a different thing in entirety. And he says this is the same model as when the Jewish people are fighting wars of mitzvahs, that they wipe out the residents. That's what happens. The Kevan Shara Sha'am Chavetz Bashalom Mochal al Ataf Banoshim Vi'al HaShalom. when it was apparent that the Jewish soldiers really wanted to keep something, so Moshe Rabbeinu allowed them to keep, the children, the women who had not been with men, and the spoils, but the women who have been with men, that's sort of the core of what they're fighting against Midian about in the first place. Okay. Hold on one second. Okay, I think we can go on now, but just the point that I really wanted to focus on was the idea of Moshe sending in such a small army. That was an interesting thing. If you look at the Orach Chaim and Pasuk Vav, it's a very interesting comment here. So it says Moshe sent them. What does it mean he sent them? How about you tell them to go? To send them either connotes to physically whatever, or it connotes sending them as your proxies. Vayishlach is it's an interesting word in biblical Hebrew. So the Orach Chaim says, Omro vayishlach niskavein la'asosan shluchei mitzvah linkom nikmas Hashem u'shluchei mitzvah einam nizakin. A very interesting comment from the Orach Chaim. The Orach Chaim says that the reason it specifically says he sent them, like the language we would use for proxy, he was trying to create a status for them as being emissaries to do a mitzvah. Shliach mitzvah money, right? That's the thing. Someone goes on a trip, you give them tzedakah money. Why do you give them tzedakah money? Because the Gemara says that people on their way to a mitzvah are protected. So Moshe Rabbeinu said to them, you're not just going to fight a war, you're fighting the war of God, and therefore you're shluchei mitzvah. It's a whole different story. That's what the Orach Chaim says over here. An interesting thing to think about. Okay. We are going to jump far ahead now to verse 23. Actually, we're going to go to verse 21. Excuse me, verse 21, chapter 31, verse 21. Jewish people come back. They've been very successful at war. We already discussed the issue about the women of Midian, and we already also discussed that Moshe did allow them to keep items that they got in the battle. And now Elazar, the Kohen Gadol, steps up and he says, Vayomer Elazar Kohen al Shiat Tzava. Elazar the Kohen said to the soldiers, Haboim Lamelchama, that come back from war, this is the law which God commanded Moshe. 22 Achas Azohav, Esakosef, and Achoshes, Esabarzel, Esabadil, so far as he lifts off various metals. Verse 23, Kol Davar Sheyavo Vaish, Taviru Vaish V'Tahir. Anything that comes in contact with fire, any cooking instruments that come in contact with fire, place it over fire, and they will thereby be purified. But they also have to be placed in the mikvah. And if it's something that does not go through the fire, that is not exposed to things at great heat, then expose it to the waters of the mikvah. This, of course, is very practical. Not many of us have spoils that we bring back from war, but if we go to a yard sale and we buy something from a non-Jewish owner, so if it's a pot, we would have to kasher it, and we'd have to take it to the mikvah. Once we're here together, I just want to be very clear, because people get confused about this sometimes. The mikvah, as in the Kela mikvah outside by the shul, does not serve the function of kashering. Kashering could well be translated as purging. There's non-kosher taste absorbed into a vessel. We need to expunge that non-kosher taste from the vessel. That's one thing. There's a whole separate mitzvah that if one buys even an unused vessel from a non-Jew, one needs to bring it to the mikvah. That's so two different things. This is not the first war the Jewish people have been in. So I understand this is an important halacha for Elazar to convey to the Jewish soldiers who are coming home with spoils. But why is this the place that it was told to them? Why isn't it conveyed earlier in the Torah? So the Ramban is interested in that. If you look at the Ramban on Pasuk Chav Gimel, it's a lengthy Ramban, but at the end of the Ramban, probably around, a quarter left in the Ramban, about 10, 15 lines from the bottom of it, V'hizirosam. V'hizirosam ato ba'galas klei midyan meisirei hagoyim. Elazar urges them now about the concept of purging the Midianite vessels. He didn't say that in the aftermath of the war of Sichon or Og, presumably there were spoils there as well. It says we took spoils. They were Amorite kings. The Artsam Minachlas Israel, and their land was from the proper inheritance of the Jewish people. V'hutar lahem kol shlalam afilu ha'yisurim tichsev v'vatim malayim kol tov asher lo milesa. There's an idea that the Amorites lived in the land of Israel. So there's an idea that God is allowing us to take everything they own. We're not taking their land. This is not to occupy the land. This is to take vengeance against them. And therefore, there is a halachic prohibition specifically with their vessels, a very interesting thing. So it's really interesting to think about. So he says, when it comes to Sichon and Og, the whole concept of occupying their land this was the plan from the beginning, to take that territory. So since that was the plan from the beginning, there's no issue with them taking anything belonging to Sichon and Og. But the plan wasn't to seize the possessions of Midian. The plan was just to fight against them, to take vengeance for God. So therefore, that's why if you don't do X, Y, and Z, their possessions will be prohibited upon you. Very interesting, Ramban. He then goes on to say there could be a totally different thing having to do with Tumah Tzibur, that if everyone is ritually impure at the time, we're more lenient. I don't want to go into the details of that, but it's interesting to think about as well. Okay. There was a whole system that Moshe explains to them, or Elazar explains to them. Moshe explains to the Jewish people that they should take off a percentage of the spoils and share it with the rest of the nation, share it with God, and only a percentage they can take for themselves. And Moshe follows through on that plan with the Jewish people. And now in verse 31, it says, Vayas Moshe ve'Elazar HaKohen, Moshe and Elazar the high priest did, Kasher tzivo Hashem es Moshe, as God commanded Moshe. Now, let me just ask you a question. This was something that was relevant across the board. We already said there were 1,000 soldiers from each tribe. So there was representation in the army across the tribes of Klal Yisrael. So this messaging to the soldiers was going to need to be done to every tribe among the Jewish people. So Moshe and Elazar messaged it appropriately to the soldiers and implemented it. Can you think of anyone else who maybe should have been involved in this procedure? So we have sometimes with the census that it's Moshe and Aaron and Nisiei Ha'eda, the heads of the various tribes. So the Ramban is just interested, where are the heads of the tribes on this one? Why is this only for Moshe and Elazar? Why wouldn't the heads of the tribes be involved with the messaging and implementation as well? It's an interesting question, and we will discuss this tomorrow, God willing. But again, we discussed the Ramban today in terms of Moshe's reasoning for only sending 12,000 soldiers. We discussed the Orach Chaim in terms of the language of the pasuk, that Moshe wanted the soldiers to have a status of shluchei mitzvah. We discussed the Ramban as to why the halachos of kashering and toveling are specifically conveyed here and not after earlier spoils taken in war in the story.